What if I told you the quiet docks of Subic Bay, once a retreat for a fading empire, are now attracting attention again? Not from one country, but from many. The same waters where American warships once slipped away quietly are now drawing the world's gaze. And this time, it's not with suspicion, but with a surprising kind of hope. A few months ago, at a naval gathering near Subi, something unusual happened. A European admiral, visiting the Philippines for the first time, stood on a pier watching local fishermen mend their nets. He turned to his aide and said quietly, "You know, we might have underestimated this place." No fanfare, no speeches, just a simple sentence. But it was the kind of sentence that makes people rethink what they thought they knew. That's when we met Mateo Rivera. He's no general, not even a soldier. Mateo runs a small hardware shop a few blocks from the Subic Freeport zone. He's 63, born in Zambales, a man with more memories than money. And he's seen Subic rise, fall, and now come back to life. He remembers the silence in 1992 when the Americans left after nearly a century. Shops closed, jobs vanished. The town felt like it was dying. "I thought it was the end," Mateo said. But Subic didn't die. It limped, it adapted, and it survived. Then things started to change again. First a few ships on the horizon, then more. Australian vessels, Japanese survey boats, American warships, and even ships from India, Korea, and France. Mateo noticed before the news did. I'd see different uniforms, different flags. They'd come into my shop for tools or just to chat. You could tell they weren't just passing through. Why all this attention for a small bay on Luzon's west coast? The answer isn't just about military strategy or trade. It's about the Philippines itself, a nation often underestimated, but always standing. A people skilled at surviving storms, both natural and political. Mateo doesn't talk about geopolitics. That's for the big men, he laughs. But he knows about comebacks. As a boy, he saw massive aircraft carriers in Subic Bay, then watched them leave. Now he watches his grandchildren play near the same waters, asking, "Tay, why are there so many ships again? Are we in a war?" He doesn't have a full answer, but he knows this: Subic matters again. Not because someone decided it does, but because it always has. Maybe that's what the Admiral saw. Not just ships or maps, but the quiet strength of a place that refuses to disappear. Today, Mateo sees new buildings, cafes, warehouses, even a tech startup by the waterfront. He shakes his head and smiles. "I never thought I'd live to see this," he says softly, but he has seen it, and so have we. And it makes you think maybe the real story isn't just about who's coming back to Subic, but why they left in the first place and what's changed since. Subic's revival isn't only military, it's emotional, even personal. For many Filipinos like Mateo, it's proof that history doesn't always repeat. Sometimes it redeems. When the Americans left in 1992, they didn't just abandon buildings and fences, they left behind a wound. For many in Zambales, it felt like being discarded, like realizing you were never truly part of the home you helped keep. For Mateo, the pain wasn't just in the empty docks, it was in his neighbors' eyes. Vendors stopped cooking for visiting sailors. Teachers saw their classes shrink. Jeepney drivers sat idle on roads that no longer led anywhere. But what the world didn't see was what came next. The people stayed. They rebuilt. Former base workers, logisticians, mechanics, hotel staff took what they knew and created something new. The Freeport Zone was born quietly, with faith instead of fanfare. Church bells still rang. Kids still played on the beach. The sea was still there. Slowly, trade and tourism returned. That was Subic's first rebirth. But what's happening now is different. This time, it's not just one country looking at Subic, it's the whole world. Rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea, Chinese ships pushing closer, fishermen caught in dangerous games. Suddenly, Subic was back on everyone's radar. Strategists, think tanks, and generals began talking about it as more than a dot on the map. It was now a launch point, a supply hub, a statement. The Philippines, long seen as a friendly junior partner, was being viewed differently. Washington started talking about shared defense. Tokyo sent patrol ships. Canberra increased joint exercises. Even India expressed interest in port visits and defense projects. Why? Because there's no other place quite like it. Subic Bay has a deep natural harbor with direct access to both the South China Sea and the Pacific. It's a logistical dream, and it's home to a people known for hospitality, resilience, and a democracy that's endured despite challenges. Mateo notices the change. He's seen young Filipino cadets in new uniforms from Australia, American engineers buying supplies for a new radar station, even a foreign film crew calling Subic the Sentinel of the Pacific. That's the first time I've heard that, Mateo says, shaking his head. But it fits, because Subic is no longer just a bay, it's a watchtower, a place where nations now keep their eyes, not just for war, but to acknowledge a truth that's long been overlooked. The Philippines is not just a pawn on someone else's chessboard. It's a player, a host, a gatekeeper. And Mateo, like many others, is starting to feel it. There's a quiet pride returning, not loud or boastful, but real. When his grandson Leo said he wanted to become a naval architect to design ships that could one day patrol Philippine waters, Mateo didn't laugh. He nodded. That's good, he said. We need minds like yours now. Because this isn't just about guns or ships. It's about dignity, presence, and recognition. For Mateo, who once feared Subic's story ended when the Americans left, what's happening now feels like a different kind of miracle. One built not by foreign powers, but by Filipino resolve. Yet there's another side to this comeback. A quieter one, not found in news reports or treaties, but in whispers and prayers. Near Subic's coastline, there's a small chapel. Nothing grand, just salt-stained walls and a wooden cross that has survived both typhoons and time. Every Sunday, families gather there. Fishermen with calloused hands, mothers clutching rosaries, children too young to understand why their parents bow their heads a little longer these days. Mateo often sits in the back, listening not just to the priest, but to the silence before the final hymn. That silence, he says, is where the truth hides. People are grateful for Subic's revival, but they're also worried, because when the world pays attention to you, it usually wants something. That's the hidden side of Subic's comeback. Beneath the optimism, the construction, and the renewed port calls lies a quiet question. Are we being chosen or used? It's not an easy question. Global powers rarely focus on a place out of kindness. It's usually strategy, location, leverage. But something is different now. The Philippines, especially in places like Subic, no longer stands with open hands. It stands with a spine, not hardened, not arrogant, but steady. The Filipino people have learned the language of power, but more importantly, they've remembered the language of principles. Subic is not just a port, it's a test. How do you welcome allies without becoming dependent? How do you grow stronger without losing your soul? How do you protect what's yours without becoming what you fear? Mateo's daughter Elena is a public school history teacher. She teaches both the history in textbooks and the history written in her students' surnames. Recently, she led a discussion about foreign militaries returning to Subic. She expected confusion, maybe indifference. Instead, a student raised a hand and asked, "Ma'am, if they come back, do they protect us, or do we protect them?" That question stayed with her, because that's the real issue. The Philippines, so long defined by what was done to it, is now asking what it stands for. And Subic is at the center of that shift. It's not just about welcoming ships. It's about deciding what kind of country we want to be and what role we will play in a world that is rearming and realigning faster than ever. Some still see the Philippines as a convenient ally, close to China, friendly to the West, and too poor to resist pressure. But that's the old way of thinking. The new view sees a nation of 110 million resilient people, a democracy that, despite flaws, still votes, still sings its anthem with pride, still buries its heroes with tears and songs, and a people who carry their faith like armor, not the kind that blinds them, but the kind that reminds them of what's sacred. Mateo recalls an old Navy officer once telling him, "You Filipinos are too nice for this game." Mateo smiled. "Maybe," he said, "but we've survived every empire that's come through here. So maybe being nice isn't the weakness you think it is." That's the quiet strength of the Philippines, not its weapons or economy, but its ability to stay rooted. Even when the winds of great power competition try to shake it, Subic stands. New radars rise, docks expand. Closed-door intelligence meetings take place. The stage of strategy is set. But outside those rooms, life goes on. A fisherman repairs his net. A grandmother lights a candle. A teacher grades papers under a flickering bulb. Life continues, only now with eyes more open. There's a sense that something big is happening, that Subic is no longer just watching history, it's making it. And for the first time in decades, Filipinos themselves are helping write that history. So when people ask Mateo, "Are you excited? Are you nervous?" He always answers, "I'm ready." Not because he knows what's coming, but because he knows who we are. That, more than any treaty or warship, will shape Subic's future. A people who carry history not as a burden, but as a responsibility. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Mateo stood at the old Subic docks. The air smelled of salt and diesel. In the distance, a Philippine Navy vessel, small but proud, glided into the bay, flanked by two foreign ships with different flags. It was a quiet, almost cinematic moment. But for Mateo, it was more than that. He remembered when these waters belonged to others, when the ships had foreign names, and their crews barely noticed the locals. Now things had changed. The ships came in cooperation. The faces looked into yours. Standing on that pier, Mateo realized, Subic didn't just matter again, the world needed it. And not just for its deep harbor or radars, but for what Filipinos bring to the table. Trust, faith, dignity. For decades, the Philippines was seen as Asia's little brother. Friendly, smiling, easy to overlook. But in the halls of power, something is shifting. Policymakers now speak of Manila not as a follower, but as a fulcrum. And Subic, once abandoned, is at its center. Elena tells her students this every week. Not with fireworks, not with fear, but with quiet conviction. We are not just next to the South China Sea, we are guardians of it. They understand. They've grown up hearing about disputed islands and Coast Guard standoffs. But now, for the first time, they feel like participants, protectors of something ancient and vital. Mateo thinks about this often, especially at night when the town is quiet and the lights of the docked ships shimmer on the water. He thinks of his grandfather, who never saw a free Philippines, of his father, who worked for the Americans but dreamed of independence, and of his grandson Leo, who will one day build ships and futures. Mateo doesn't use big words, but one night, sipping Kapeng Barako under the stars, he said something that stayed with us. For all the years they looked down on us, we never stopped looking out. That's why Subic matters again, because we never stopped watching the sea, and now the world is watching with us. That's the real story, not of military deals or strategic assets, but of a people who never let go of their place in the world, even when the world tried to move past them. The tide is shifting. Subic's comeback isn't a gift from foreign powers, it's proof of patience, purpose, and that quiet, stubborn Filipino spirit. It says we're still here. So as new chapters begin, as more ships arrive, more hands shake, and more futures connect, let's remember what this place has taught us. Strength isn't always loud. Pride can be quiet. And sometimes the most powerful ports aren't just gateways for goods or soldiers, but for respect, for healing, and for redefining what a nation stands for. Mateo still walks the same streets, still sells nails and plywood, but his eyes are different now. He doesn't look back. He looks ahead. Because today, Subic isn't just a reminder of what was lost. It's a promise of what's coming. And in that promise lives the soul of a nation that refuses to be small. If this story touched you, if you caught even a glimpse of the quiet strength of the Filipino spirit through Subic's journey, don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that comebacks are real, that even when the world looks away, the Filipino heart keeps standing. Hit the like button if you believe in the strength of our people. Subscribe for more stories that show the soul behind the headlines. And in the comments, tell us, what does Subic mean to you? Because this isn't just a story about a place, it's a story about us. And it's time the world sees who we really are.